Ever feel like everyone's talking about Bitcoin, but you're stuck on the sidelines, kind of nodding along?
Uh-huh. Yeah, it can feel like that sometimes. Like everyone else is in on some secret.
Exactly. And we're diving deep into Bitcoin today, using Three Blue One Brown's awesome video as our guide. We're going to demystify this thing.
It's a wild ride, from a simple idea to some seriously complex tech.
For sure. And I feel like a lot of people, myself included, get tripped up right at the beginning. Like, what problem is Bitcoin even trying to solve?
It all boils down to trust. Bitcoin wants to create a system where you don't need to rely on a bank or a government to handle your money.
So, like, digital cash, but without the middleman?
Exactly. Think of it like digital cash, but instead of relying on a bank to verify transactions, it relies on a shared ledger that everyone can see.
A shared ledger, like a record book in the cloud. But who's making sure nobody's cheating on this ledger?
Ah, that's the genius part.
Hmm.
It uses something called digital signatures. Kind of like a real signature, but way more secure thanks to cryptography.
Cryptography sounds intense.
It's actually pretty elegant when you get down to it.
Yeah.
See, in this system, you have two keys, a public key and a private key. Anyone can use your public key to verify a signature you made, but only you, with your private key, can create that signature in the first place.
Okay, so it's like my digital fingerprint. But if everyone's got access to this shared ledger, couldn't someone just, like, change the records?
That's where the blockchain comes in. Imagine this shared ledger, but instead of one big book, it's a chain of blocks. And each block contains a bunch of transactions.
Okay, but people could still mess with those blocks, right?
Not so fast. Each block is cryptographically linked to the one before it, creating a tamper-proof timeline. So if you change one thing, you'd have to change everything that came after it.
Ah, so it's like a domino effect.
Exactly. And this whole chain is secured by what we call proof of work. Basically, computers have to solve incredibly difficult puzzles to add a new block to the chain.
Puzzles, like Sudoku for computers, what do those have to do with anything?
Well, these puzzles are special. They're designed to be really hard to solve, but easy to verify. We're talking serious computational power just to find the right answer, and that's what makes the whole thing secure.
Okay, so now we're talking serious computer stuff. How does solving a puzzle actually secure anything?
It's all about those cryptographic hash functions we mentioned earlier. Imagine a magic box.
A magic box. Okay, you've got my attention. I do like magic.
So this box, right, you put something in, could be anything, a number, a word, an entire movie, and it spits out this unique fixed-length code. That's the hash.
Kind of like a fingerprint for whatever you put in.
Exactly. And here's the kicker.
Mm.
You can't work backward from the fingerprint to get the original input. It's a one-way street.
Okay, so that makes sense for like verifying stuff, but how does that play into the security of Bitcoin? We were talking about digital signatures earlier.
Right. So every time you make a Bitcoin transaction, you're basically signing it with your private key. Remember, that's super secret code only you know.
Yeah, like a digital John Hancock.
And that signature is created using, you guessed it, those hash functions. It's incredibly secure because any tiny change to the transaction would completely change the signature.
So it's like if I try to sneak in and change the amount of Bitcoin I'm sending, everyone will know I tampered with it.
Exactly. It's like leaving a trail of invisible ink that glows under a black light if anyone tries anything funny. And because all of this is tied to those difficult puzzles the miners are solving,
It all connects. The puzzle, the signature, the blockchain.
it creates this incredibly robust system. Oh, and speaking of miners, remember that Coinbase transaction we mentioned earlier?
The one where miners get to pay themselves. It did sound a bit self-serving.
Well, it is how new Bitcoin is introduced into the system. But here's the crucial part. That Coinbase transaction, like every other transaction, needs to be digitally signed by the miner.
So they're proving they did the work to solve the puzzle and get their Bitcoin reward.
Precisely. And because the block's hash, that fingerprint we talked about, depends on all the transactions inside it, including the Coinbase transaction, it all gets tied back to the proof of work. If you try to cheat the system, you'd have to redo the work for that block and every block that comes after it. Talk about a bad investment.
Wow. Okay, so it's like this incredibly secure, closed loop with everything linked together. But I have to ask, this whole puzzle-solving thing, it sounds incredibly difficult. How powerful do these computers need to be?
You're not wrong to think that. It takes a lot of computing power. Remember those hash functions?
Yeah.
Well, the puzzle is basically trying to find a specific input that, when hashed, produces an output with certain characteristics. Imagine trying to find a specific grain of sand in the Sahara Desert, and you can only check one grain at a time.
Sounds tedious.
Yeah, a massive computational challenge. Yeah. And the crazy thing is, the difficulty of these puzzles self-adjusts based on how much computing power is on the network. If miners are solving them too quickly, the network makes them harder. Too slow. It makes them easier. Keeps things nice and balanced.
It's like the system has its own brain. So we've got these incredibly difficult puzzles, miners with supercomputers, and this whole system of digital signatures and hash functions. Phew, it's a lot to take in. But I have to ask, how does any of this translate into actually using Bitcoin?
That's the real question, isn't it? And the exciting part is,
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it? I mean, it's cool that we can geek out about all this tech stuff, but at the end of the day, can I actually buy anything with Bitcoin? Like that virtual coffee everyone's always going on about?
that's the goal, right?
Yeah.
And we're getting closer every day. It's still early days, but people are using Bitcoin for all sorts of things now.
Mm.
Online purchases, even sending money internationally.
Okay, so let's say I do want to buy that virtual coffee. I hit pay with Bitcoin.
Mm.
What happens then?
It's kind of like sending an email, in a way. You need a Bitcoin address to send it to, which is basically like a digital mailbox for your Bitcoin.
So my Bitcoin wallet has an address, and anyone who wants to send me Bitcoin needs to know it.
Right. And just like you wouldn't share your email password, you got to keep your Bitcoin private keys super safe.
Because if I lose those keys, I lose my Bitcoin.
Exactly. So when you make that transaction, it gets broadcast to the entire Bitcoin network, but it doesn't go directly onto the blockchain. It goes into this pool of pending transactions, sort of like a waiting room.
A waiting room. So it's not instant.
Not quite. This is where those miners come back in. They're churning away, solving those puzzles, trying to add the next block to the chain.
Right, and whoever solves it gets to add their block of transactions and collect the Bitcoin reward.
You got it. And when they're picking which transactions to include, they usually go for the ones with the highest fees attached. It's like a little bonus to incentivize the miners to process things faster.
So it's like a speed lane for Bitcoin transactions.
You could say that. So once a miner includes your transaction in their block, and that block gets added to the blockchain, then it's official, confirmed.
And because of that whole tamper-proof blockchain thing, I can be sure my virtual coffee payment went through.
Exactly. Now, the whole thing can take a little time, especially when the network is super busy. But as tech improves and new solutions pop up, it's getting faster and cheaper all the time.
That's good to hear. Well, this has been an awesome deep dive. I feel like I've actually learned something. Any parting words of wisdom about Bitcoin? What's the main takeaway you hope our listeners walk away with?
You know, regardless of whether Bitcoin takes over the world or not, the tech behind it is mind-blowing. The blockchain, the cryptography, the whole decentralized thing, it could revolutionize way more than just money.
It's like we're getting a peek into the future, a new way to build trust and transparency online.
Absolutely. And even just having a basic understanding of how it all works gives you a leg up. You can actually follow along with these conversations about the future of money and tech and really understand what's at stake.
And on that note, we'll leave you to ponder the possibilities. This is The Deep Dive, reminding you to always stay curious. Catch you next time.